the Iranian conventional military is effectively destroyed. They don't have a navy. They don't have the ability to hit us like they could have even a few weeks ago. And what that does is that gives us options, Mr. President. Now, there's been a lot of reporting about diplomatic options, about negotiations. There's, of course, Pete and his team. There are further military options. But what we have now that we didn't have when the president took over just a little over a year ago is the ability to use every tool at our disposal to ensure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. Because when I say options, I think it's important the American people know options for what? And it's options to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear weapon. You talk about people who walk into a crowded supermarket and have a vest on, and they blow up the vest and a couple of people get killed, and that's a terrible tragedy. What happens when what's on the vest is not something that can kill a couple of people, but can kill many, many tens of thousands of people? That is the most important American national security objective that exists for any administration at any time, is you don't want the worst people in the world to have a nuclear weapon. That's why the president is doing this. That's why the president cares so much about this particular issue. I'll let Steve talk a little bit about the details of the negotiation, but the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Marco is I'm very mindful, of course, that we have a lot of folks overseas fighting very ably for the United States of America. I know Pete and the whole team, we're very proud of them, but they're fighting at a time where we are about to enter as Christians the most important week of the Christian calendar, the Holy Week that celebrates the return of Jesus Christ to Jerusalem. And so I want to say to all of my fellow American Christians, but particularly those serving in the Gulf, that I wish you all a very blessed Easter, a very blessed Holy Week, and we continue to stand behind you and continue to support you every step of the way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Marco?
The most important job any president has is to keep the American people safe. And every president says it, but we have a president that means it and does something about it. As the president outlined very clearly to the world on the night this operation began, Iran has been at war with the United States for 47 years. For 47 years, Iran has been killing Americans and attacking Americans across this planet. And other presidents had an opportunity to do something about it. And they all warned about how Iran was dangerous, but they refused to act. And this president's not someone that's going to refuse to act. He's not going to leave a danger like this in place. He's going to address it.
That was President Donald Trump, Caroline, assembled with his cabinet in Washington, D.C. And no surprise that Iran and this president's attitude towards Iran is the headlines. Summarize.
It is, and we just left Marco Rubio, of course, Secretary of State, discussing where we stand in terms of the negotiations and mixed messaging perhaps from the president and the cabinet meeting more broadly, talking about they don't know if we're willing to work on a deal with Iran. But he reiterates once again that Iran's navy, military has been severely impeded. And again, he's disappointed with NATO. But more broadly, he's talking about willing to work. He doesn't know if he's willing to work on the deal, but he's once again trying to say that Iran is very desperate to. Now we know about the market implications of this, the oil spike that we have seen, and he's actually saying he thought energy prices would have moved further and that stocks would have fallen further. But at the time, he keeps talking about this short-term move and perhaps distraction, as he calls it, but more broadly, there's a short-term interim, and he does hope that it will be over soon. We've heard about energy prices that he says will come back down and maybe lower, Ed.
When the headline hit that the president said he didn't know if he was now willing to work on a deal with Iran, you saw equities take a leg lower, already under pressure. That includes technology stocks. And then, you know, other movements in different assets. There's a lot of politics to this still. Let's get out to Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons, co-host Balance of Power in Washington, D.C. And Kayleigh, there's a lot that Caroline and I didn't get to. What's the need to know from the opening moments of that cabinet meeting?
Well, the real crux of it is actually, Ed, what you were just pointing to, the idea that the president now says he's not sure if he's willing to make a diplomatic deal with Iran after just earlier this week, including yesterday, saying he would like to make a deal and that Iran wants to make a deal. Perhaps that is due to Iran's formal response, which is, of course, state media says it has sent over regarding the U.S.'s 15-point ceasefire plan in which a number of demands around Iran's nuclear program and missile programs were made. Iran, of course, may be asking for some things that President Trump and the wider administration are not so willing to agree to here, including when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. So it does seem that he's, at this point, maybe putting a little bit of cold water on the idea of diplomacy, even as he warns Iran that they need to be able to come to the table. As we are now getting closer and closer to this self-imposed deadline, he has said it will be tomorrow evening, in which he suggests that there could be much more serious attacks on Iran if they do not reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or if diplomacy doesn't prevail here. It'll be interesting in this cabinet meeting to hear from the others, like the Vice President J.D. Vance, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who reporting indicates will be involved, and the president just alluded to would be involved in any kind of diplomatic discussions here, as well as his envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. But it does seem like a president who is, while maintaining that the military is doing what it set out to do in destroying these targets, and that they're doing so ahead of schedule. He once again said we're ahead of that 4 to 6 week schedule, even as we are approaching now the 4-week mark. It does seem that he is suggesting that it may not be the time for diplomacy in his mind necessarily, but we know that this president is capable of changing his mind very quickly, and he could be saying something very different the next time we hear him talk, frankly.
We will keep abreast of the breaking news throughout the cabinet meeting. And Kayleigh Lyons, thank you for bringing us up to speed on the key takeaways. Let's bring you up to speed on the market reaction. Look, we're off of our lows. We're down by a percentage point. At one point, we sunk even further in terms of points perspective from the NASDAQ 100 after that initial knee-jerk reaction to the president, seeming to hint that maybe he isn't willing to strike a deal with Iran. Brent crude is still up some 5 percentage points. Look, there is still a lot of risk aversion amid this conflict in the Middle East at the moment, Ed. But there's also notable movers underneath the hood when you're thinking about what's dragging down on the NASDAQ 100 too.
Yeah, this is difficult and worth some analysis. So two of the big movers to the downside within the technology sector are Alphabet, the parent of Google, and Meta. Meta having its worst day since the end of October of 2025 last year. The morning started with Mag 7 under pressure because of the belief by the market that the war in Iran will be prolonged. But there was a big piece of news in the last 24 hours, a jury verdict finding Meta and Google liable for harming a young social media user with products that the court decided were deliberately or negligently designed to be addictive. This was the first social media addiction trial. Let's bring in Bloomberg's legal reporter, Madeleine Meckelberg, who was in the courtroom for that verdict. And let's start with the very basics. The jury decision, what that decision was based on, predicated on, and we'll go from there. Madeleine.
Right. So a jury in Los Angeles spent about 9 days deliberating on evidence that they heard over a roughly 4-week trial. They heard from people including Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Instagram head Adam Mosseri, but then they also heard from people within the life of this young woman who brought the suit, who were able to speak about the harms and suffering that she experienced as a result of using these platforms. But these cases, as you mentioned, are about this claim, this central idea that these companies knowingly and intentionally designed their platforms to be addictive and should have known that they would cause harm to young users.
Therein lies the crux, Madeleine, because before the arguments have been about the content from which in many ways they are shielded, but this is about how we are served said content more broadly. What is it that is deemed to be harmful, and are we already expecting the business model changes are going to be interpreted from this? Because things have changed. Companies have responded to a certain extent, but they were deemed in many ways negligent because there weren't warnings to younger people.
Right. That's why you've heard this case be referred to as a landmark case, because this really is a novel legal theory. As you know, these companies have been shielded from immunity from suits alleging harm by users due to content on their platform. But this is about the design. So jurors heard a lot about the algorithm itself, and then they heard a lot about features that these companies use that they had experts come in to say are designed to be addictive. They called it addiction by design. That's being peppered with notifications, that's endless scroll, being able to pick up your phone and scroll through the social media feeds and not really reach an end of content. It's about videos that automatically play once you finish watching one. And so they say that all these features cumulatively are designed to hook you and keep you on the platform as long as possible, and that children are particularly susceptible to those kind of features.
We just showed statements on the screen, but in summary, both companies disagree with the verdict. Meta's looking at its legal options. Google plans to appeal. And as we said at the start of the segment, both stocks are under pressure. Later in the show, we'll get into the kind of business and what side and why the stock's under pressure. But you set out what happened. Bloomberg's Madeleine Meckelberg, who was in the courtroom in Los Angeles. Thank you. Joining us now with more on the implications of the case is Eric Goldman, Associate Dean for Research at Santa Clara University School of Law. And Eric, you've joined us throughout this process. We now have a jury verdict. I think to start, just your response to the outcome of this specific case.
The whole point of the jury trial is that we needed an answer from average Americans about how they viewed the culpability of social media services, and we got an answer. It's an answer that I think the defendants don't like. The plaintiffs, I think, are happy with it. But it's just one answer of what is expected to be multiple answers coming from additional trials.
Again, the companies do not agree with the outcome. Google plans to appeal, we know. Meta is looking at its options. One of the things that you're cited as looking at is the level of damages awarded in this specific case. And I think we discussed in prior conversations the context that there are other legal proceedings going alongside this in parallel with this case. But why focusing on the damages? Why is that important?
It allows the parties to start to estimate how much money are we even talking about. And until we got a data point like the jury verdict, really the parties couldn't even imagine any agreement. They were so far apart. Now we can start to quantify the numbers. If there's 3,000 plaintiffs that are currently pending, we're talking about roughly close to $20 billion. Now, those are numbers that are huge, and yet there are numbers that Google and Meta might think that they can afford. So now that we know how much money might be in play, there's new grounds for discussions about settlement.
It's not just the consumer protection angle, though, but there's also the public schools, there's the states, Eric. But I want to go to what happened earlier in the week on Tuesday in New Mexico, because actually a much larger sum of money was being demanded of Meta after it was deemed not to have protected teenagers in that particular state when it came to sexual predators. Now, can you weave in that particular legal strike on Meta and what that means more broadly in this context?
Yeah, it's a reinforcement that, again, a different jury was asked essentially the same set of questions. How responsible are social media for the harms that their users suffer? And the jury came back with functionally the same answer. Now, in that case, they were limited in terms of how many damages they could assign to any particular victim. So we don't really know how that number might have looked if a different set of legal theories were used. But it is the sign that we have two juries saying we will impose substantial damages on social media. Those are two really key data points.
And Eric, of course, as we've mentioned, both companies disagree. And Google is coming out strongly saying you misinterpret our very business model. YouTube is not a social media platform. It's a streaming platform. Whereas Meta is looking at its own arguments, but more broadly, its argument has been there is so much more to mental health than one particular platform, one particular app. And they actually had some evidence from various doctors showing that in some ways, certain of these social media platforms offered positive narratives to it was indeed a woman called Kaylee, we understand, who brought up the particular court case in this hearing. Eric, what do you make of those arguments?
I think that it's we're so easy to focus on the parties in the courtroom. We have Kaylee, the victim, and telling her story, and we've got the social media services telling their story. But there's a whole bunch of other individuals who are affected by the discussions taking place in that courtroom. There are many users who benefit extensively from social media, who make it an integral part of their day and often the best part of their day. And if there were any changes in social media, either due to the financial pressure or due to legal compulsion, those benefits for those other users might reduce or go away. And none of that was really relevant to the trial. And as a result, there's a lot of people who are going to be affected by these cases who don't even have a voice in the proceedings.
Well said, Eric Goldman. Appreciate you coming on Santa Clara University School of Law. Really deep dive there. Now coming up, we've got more on the wider market implications for tech after the landmark social media addiction verdict against Meta and Google. From New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Tech.
We're looking at Meta and Google. Meta in particular on track for its worst day since October. The summary of the sell side is that there is going to be an overhang on this name a headwind, a risk relating to social media addiction because the landmark jury verdict holding Google and Meta liable for harming a young user is being compared to the groundbreaking cases that force changes for big tobacco. That could have an impact on social media firms, advertising businesses. Let's get out to Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, who leads our coverage of social media as an industry. This is what you've been writing about, that Meta and Google risk a big tobacco-like response because of the outcome of yesterday's trial. What's the reporting telling us?
Yeah, well, the jury found that these products can be addictive, right? You think of other consumer products over the years that have been found to be addictive. Big tobacco is probably top of that list. And you see the tarnish on an industry like that. And you have to sort of think, is this the same kind of thing that's going to be happening to the social media platforms? Eric was just talking with you guys in the last segment about the fact that there are thousands of other cases looming with similar arguments. This is just the first. Obviously, each case is different. But if you sort of look at what's happened this week between New Mexico and the trial in LA and say, okay, juries are buying this argument, juries are believing that these companies and platforms are responsible, and you extrapolate that out thousands of times over the next couple of years, you suddenly are looking at a very different industry with a very different reputation.
And Kurt, this comes with the current context that already the landscape has shifted. Australia has a ban on 16s and under. We're looking at Asia replicating. Europe is discussing, even California thinking about it. And at the same time, we've actually seen the companies try to respond with changes and with certainly telling us about the changes and the protections that certain parents and kids have. Will business models have to change?
I think that's the ultimate question, because if they just simply have to write a check and this problem goes away, what's the incentive? These are trillion-dollar companies. They're not going to, balk at writing a $6 million check. If Congress, especially in the U.S., sees these types of trials, sees these verdicts, sees the momentum that's being built around the child safety sort of movement here, and says, hey, look, this is sort of what we've been talking about but been dragging our feet on. We're going to pass a law that changes some of these features and forces the companies to change their products. Now it gets really interesting, because if these companies can't get people to come spend as much time scrolling, obviously that's going to affect, how much money they can make from revenue. These are attention-based businesses. And so anytime the attention is not on them, it could hurt.
Kurt, in the report that you did with Alex on the possible product changes, what are they? And they're, part of those that are taking legal action against the companies, they are pushing for specific changes or features on those platforms. And what are they?
So the individual plaintiffs, like what we saw this week in LA, those are personal injury cases. They're not seeking changes to the product, but the school districts that are suing these platforms are seeking changes. I spoke to one of the lead lawyers who's going to be representing the school districts yesterday. She talked about notifications as being a big one, right? Bringing people in sometimes in the middle of the night to open up their phone and go on these services. She talked about parental controls. Age verification is a big one, making sure that young kids that aren't supposed to be on these services are not on them. So those are the types of things they're going to be pushing for. And, those also align with what we see members of Congress talk about. They just haven't really gotten anything over the line in terms of a law here.
Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, who's been across this story. We thank you so much. Let's get more of what this means for the business model, what it means for the market. Minda Smiley, senior analyst covering social media at eMarketer, joins us now. Minda, do you anticipate significant changes to revenue for these companies off the back of these landmark cases?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any big changes happen overnight, right? I think I'm gonna draw a parallel to TikTok here. Whenever we saw a lot of uncertainty around the ban, and we didn't know exactly what was going to happen to the app in the U.S., we actually didn't really see a lot of advertiser pullback or even user pullback. So, that's all to say that I think in these moments that are very, headline grabbing and whatnot, even though they are big news, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually seeing marketers pull back quite yet, users pull back quite yet. Now, that's not to say that in the long run that won't change. I think ultimately, as Kurt was saying, if we do see these products or these apps and these platforms significantly change in terms of how people can use them, what features are on them, then yes, that's the moment I think we would definitely see a larger pullback from marketers and users.
Minda, it's so interesting that, of course, you referenced TikTok, because we should remind the audience that TikTok and Snap settled ahead of this trial. But they, too, are implicated in a lot of the other cases. And this isn't just a Meta and a Google issue more broadly. So how far and wide could this net be cast?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, in this exact case, like you said, it was just Meta and YouTube, but this is just the very beginning. And I think ultimately we could see a world where, yeah, all of the major social networks, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, all the ones that that continually come up in these conversations could be implicated.
Minda, something I think that you guys at eMarketer recognize is that away from that specific case, broadly, the social media industry is facing change. Young people, and I don't use that term too broadly or lightly, don't consume as much or spend as much time on social media. That's a kind of conscious thing. Equally, the landscape is a battle for eyeballs. You have a choice of where you spend your screen time. Where does this factor into that broader landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question to me. That's something I've been talking about a lot lately, is that none of this is happening in a silo. I mean, these verdicts are landmark cases for sure, but we are seeing just generally social behaviors evolve and shift as they always do. I mean, we are seeing time spent on social media in the US kind of hit a wall. To be clear, people still spend incredible amounts of time on these platforms, which is why these cases are happening in the first place. But we are kind of seeing, that major growth that's been happening for years now is starting to hit a wall. And we also are seeing the beginnings of sort of a backlash to social media, especially among younger people who are really, they kind of know that they are addicted to these platforms, and yet they also want to get off of them. They feel quite disillusioned by them. There is this push to be more mindful of how much time you're spending on social media. That's why we're seeing companies like Brick come up, and just this push to really get off of screens in general and get offline. So these social media companies, right, they're dealing with these verdicts, but they're also just dealing with like larger behavioral issues that are having an impact.
Minda, big tech, more specifically social media, having a big tobacco moment, that's not you. We've heard that before. It kind of comes and goes. This time, is it any different?
Yeah, it does feel like this time is going to be different. I do think so. I mean, again, I don't think we're going to see massive changes overnight, but these are being called landmark cases for a reason, and the fact that these juries are not coming out, in the favor of these social media companies is not a good look for them. And I do think even, I was talking earlier about how, I don't think we're going to see like a massive hit to ad revenue or anything like that. But I do think it's going to, marketers and users alike, parents, all kinds of stakeholders are going to be, further thinking about how they show up on these platforms. And I think there is an element of like reputational damage that is already happening in terms of like, do we want to be showing ads on these platforms that are increasingly just looking like, don't have a great reputation right now. And I think, for a while, the reputation hasn't been great, but it's certainly not getting better at this point. So we could see some shifts happening there for sure.
Meta is down more than 5%, having its worst day since October. Minda Smiley, senior analyst at eMarketer, thank you very much. We've got a lot more on this topic. Our own original investigation, Can't Look Away. The case against social media is available on all Bloomberg platforms. Now, coming up, regulators in Europe are also stepping up scrutiny of online platforms. We have more on that next. This is Bloomberg Tech.
Time now for Talking Tech, and first up, China's food delivery leader, that's Meituan, posted a modest 4.1% increase in sales. Look, the company's expansion efforts outside of China helped offset price war pressures from Alibaba and JD.com. Still, that rivalry has weighed on the stock, which is down 45% over the past year. Plus, Moonshot AI is in early stages of considering an IPO in Hong Kong. Now, that's according to sources. The company behind the Kimi chatbot has reportedly held talks with China International Capital and Goldman Sachs, though deliberations are still ongoing. And in Europe, where regulators are stepping up scrutiny of online platforms. Now, the EU has launched an investigation into Snapchat, focusing on how it verifies its users' ages and addresses risks like grooming, criminal activity. At the same time, it's advancing a separate probe at the moment into pornography platforms, as over concerns it failed to adequately block minors from accessing its sites. Ed.
Just taking another look quickly at Meta, Caro, because the stock is down severely. 2 standard deviation move on track for its biggest drop since October. And actually, that drop is deepening. Remember, a jury verdict finding both Meta and Google liable of harming a young user with negligible, deliberate product design to make social media addictive. Okay, coming up on the program, Rachel Holt from Construct Capital is going to join us to discuss early stage investments in startups modernizing critical industries, venture capital, startups, and the private markets. It is halftime from San Francisco and New York. This is Bloomberg Tech.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Tech. Let's check in on a specific set of movers right now because I want to draw attention to memory makers and the chip sector more broadly. We are down by 7% if you looked at Asian trading of SK Hynix. Of Samsung, it was off by 6% as well. If you're looking at Micron here in the United States, it's off by 4%. We are going even lower, and this is all sparked by, well, a new algorithm coming from Alphabet. Google really talking up on X, something actually they discovered a year ago, Ed. But this is about the fact that you perhaps need less memory when running large language models to a factor of 6-fold less. But if I hear Jevons paradox talked one more time by an analyst, I need to start getting some money for each time I read it, Ed, because there is this view that if you can do more with less, well, you keep doing more.
Yeah, that's the basic sum of it. TurboQuant is an algorithm that, in the context of running an LLM, has up to factor of 6x less memory requirements. The market's taking that and saying that just means the hyperscalers, those building out infrastructure, will buy less memory. And that kind of went round the clock, US, Asia, back to US.
And now, though, we're still sort of having that knee-jerk reaction more broadly because these stocks have run up so far, so fast. Look, some of the names in Asia are up 700%. Micron was up about, 300% in the previous fiscal year in terms of share prices. Maybe it's a bit of profit just coming off the table as we do assess what our memory needs are and what the bottlenecks really are.
It is one of the top most read stories on the Bloomberg Terminal on .com. Encourage you to go get some of the detail. In private markets, Shield AI has announced it's raised $2 billion, hitting a valuation of $12.7 billion, more than double from a year ago. The defense tech startup raised $1.5 billion in Series G funding led by Advent International. Blackstone is putting in an additional $500 million in preferred equity financing. Shield says it'll be using part of the funding to acquire tactical simulation software maker Echelon Technology, and the terms for that were undisclosed. Shield last raised $240 million at a $5.3 billion valuation in March of 2025. That, by the way, included Bloomberg Beta, the venture firm backed by Bloomberg LP, the parent company of this organization, Caro.
I mean, look, defense tech, we've been talking about it all week, Ed. And that was after we were, of course, at Hill Valley Forum. We talked also about reindustrialization more broadly. And one venture firm that's been focused on exactly that is Construct Capital, which recently raised $300 million in a vehicle to back early-stage startups focused on foundational industries. Well, Rachel Holt is co-founder, managing partner at Construct. I'm pleased to say you join us. And you were also in D.C. with us when Hill Valley Forum was upon us. And Rachel, this wave, this movement into a realization of reindustrialization of defense tech needed in the US, are you seeing enough, buyer activity, the government realizing this and allocating money for you to put your money to work in an early stage?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Caroline. It is so interesting to see what has happened in a really short period of time. We launched Construct Capital early in 2020, pre-COVID 2020, with this belief that we needed to see productivity, technology enter what we describe as foundational industries, areas like manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, certainly defense tech. Because when you look at the numbers, productivity was declining in these spaces. It was literally taking longer to do the work. 100 hours of work was taking longer than it had 10, 15 years ago. And of course, in other sectors, we've seen tremendous growth from a productivity standpoint. So we really felt like now was the time to focus on these spaces. But as you point out, there's a tremendous amount of interest, a tremendous amount of investor interest coming into these spaces. There's been a 20x increase in Series B dollars going into these spaces since 2020 when we launched the fund to today. And certainly Hill in the Valley Forum was a a knockout event, sold out. You couldn't get anywhere near the space if you really didn't, you hadn't really been building something legitimate in this space. And so we're very excited. We're very encouraged by the amount of interest, but the contracts have to follow. But these spaces are big, they're important, and we're convinced, that there are a set of companies that are really going to break out here.
You and Dana Grayson have, as you mentioned, been doing this since 2020, let's say before it got cool. And now everyone piling in. How have you distinguished yourselves with LPs? How have you managed we're looking at your portfolio companies, the growth in Hadrian, for example, is that what's brought people forward to want to back the next fund?
Well, I think, first of all, we didn't turn our attention here. We weren't a crypto investor or Web3 investor in 2020, 2021, when that was cool. We have been dedicated our entire careers, really, to investing and operating in and around these spaces. I joined Uber in 2011 when they had just had a Series A. Everyone told me I was crazy to go join a taxi company. Their words, not mine. But it was slow-moving, heavily regulated, high CapEx. And, of course, Uber is none of those things. Dana, similarly, investing at NEA, in and around the earliest SaaS in the cloud, the earliest 3D printing companies, these companies that were not seen as venture scale outcomes when we made those moves. And I think founders, LPs certainly recognize that.
There is a distinction between an effort to reindustrialize and what's happening in defense technology. And there is a distinction on the policy side with artificial intelligence. But what broadly connects all of those is this administration focusing on cutting red tape, expediting permitting, and basically giving political will to bring more things back to America. At the early stage, how does that present an opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I really see, many of these companies are dual use companies. And I think that's important to distinguish. There are a lot of amazing companies in the defense tech space, but companies like Hadrian didn't start just selling into governments. And I think particularly at the early stages, the sales cycles are still long. You need to have a lot of different compliance requirements. Getting into one of these government contracts can be critical, can be company moving. But fundamentally, what excites us about these companies is half the GDP sits within foundational industries. These are massive spaces. There has been almost no technology incumbents. And when you think about AI and you think about sort of what we can do, we can really leapfrog forward. We are never going to be as good as China or other countries at sticking a large number of people doing repetitive tasks over and over. And software can change that. Software is what we are excellent at. Innovation is what we are excellent at.
Rachel,
and I think there's broad recognition there.
Do these companies have a future that's more focused on selling to government and the public sector? Or is there an addressable market where all of these different companies are doing business with one another? I think there's a real distinction there, too.
Yeah, I think you need volume, you need the supply chains, you need and those things happen in a very symbiotic way. What we see is there are a lot of companies that are using maybe their commercial non-government contracts to sort of build up initial capabilities, to build up supply chains, to start developing the relationships they need. And then you get one of these massive needle-moving contracts like Hadrian just announced last week with the Navy, and that can just completely accelerate a company's trajectory.
Rachel, how do you get that confidence before that contract is signed? There has been a lot of hype, dare I say it, around certain defense tech names, and many people worrying that actually the proof point really isn't there.
Look, I think first and foremost, it comes down to backing the most exceptional founders. Exceptional founders find ways to make things happen in ways, you and I can only dream of. And I think what we see is those founders are finding a way to do that today.
I have to jump in, but we so appreciate you joining us today. Rachel Holter, co-managing partner at Construct Capital. We go back to the cabinet meeting where President Trump is now taking questions. Let's listen in.
I think you're a friendly person, too. It's just such a ridiculous question.
Mr. President.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's been a report that potentially the U.S. is looking at diverting some munitions, air defenses that were meant for Ukraine to the Middle East. Is there any accuracy to that? Is that something you're considering?
Well, I'd have to speak, but We do that all the time. You know, we have tremendous amounts of ammunition. We have them in other countries, like in Germany and all over Europe. We have, you know, we're packed. And sometimes we take from one and we use for another. We help Ukraine. Biden started, and he gave $350 billion away. Too much, way too much. And we sell it now to NATO. We sell it to NATO, and they probably give it to Ukraine. Mostly, I think they give it to Ukraine. But we get paid for everything that we give. We don't give anything anymore. That's a tough situation, that whole Ukraine situation. Very, very tough. We're working very hard on getting that one solved. It doesn't have any impact on us, virtually nothing. In fact, if anything, I mean, we sell a lot of equipment for that unfortunate war. 25,000 people died last month, 25,000, mostly soldiers. Some in the towns, but for the most part, soldiers. They're dying. Nobody's seen anything like it since World War II. It's a terrible situation, and hopefully that's going to get settled. You know, I settled 8 wars. And many of them, I think, were more difficult than this one. In theory, they were more difficult, but there's tremendous hatred between President Putin and President Zelensky. Tremendous hatred. I've seen it before, but I've never seen it maybe to this extent. And I think that's calming down a little bit, and I think we have a chance of getting it done. But it doesn't affect us. Thousands of miles away. That's why when I heard the head of Germany say, this is not our war, about Iran, I said, well, Ukraine's not our war. We helped, but Ukraine's not our war. I thought it was a very inappropriate statement to make, but he made it. You can't erase it, but he felt that way. I said, well, you know, Ukraine's not our war, and it's not, but I would like to see all those young people stop being killed. I mean, they're being killed. It's like a slaughterhouse. What's happening there is horrible. 25,000 on average. 2 months ago, it was 31,000 people died in 1 month, Marco, right? I said, it's getting crazy. It's getting worse. Think of it, 31,000 soldiers, both Russian and Ukraine, died 2 months ago, 25,000 last month. And if I can solve that, it would be a great honor to do it. I wish it could have gone faster. I solved other ones in 1 day that had been going for 32 years. We stopped one that was starting. It was already started. India and Pakistan, and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, a very fine gentleman, said President Trump solved something that was going to cost 10 million lives. That was going to cost a lot of lives, 2 nuclear nations. And those were complicated, but we got them done quickly. This one is, it's a shame. And the only reason I'm doing it, frankly, is because I want to stop death. I want to stop the death from happening. I think I'm going to go with a man that I've missed, Brian. I haven't seen you in a long time. I've missed you. He's been in a very strange location. I don't know. He's had a strange thing happen. But anyway, go ahead, Brian.
Well, good to see you, too. Actually, good to see the entire cabinet here. Good to see you, too. You talked about gas prices coming down. Yeah. Obviously, they will. Would you ever consider suspending the federal gas tax in order to kind of temporarily alleviate some?
Well, some people should do that. As an example, in California, every time prices go down, his prices go up because the gas tax is bigger than the tax itself, bigger than the product itself. It hasn't. I mean, we've thought about it, I guess, but honestly, when I did this, I knew it was going to be a little bit. We had the greatest economy ever. We had the greatest stock market in history. I said, we're going to take a little bit of a hit, a short-term hit. It's going to end up going much higher than it was, in my opinion. I said we're going to have a great stock market. Nobody thought we could get to 50,000 or 7,000 in the respective indices. Nobody thought that was going to happen, but it did in the first year. They said it couldn't happen in 4 years, that you wouldn't hit 50 in 4 years, but you could maybe get close. We hit it in the first year. And I said, this is a good time to solve a problem that you had to solve. And that's what I did. But the gas tax, people have talked about it. it's something we have in our pocket if we think it's necessary.
And if I can follow real quickly, you just recently took off, Secretary Duffy, 17,000 truckers off the road that quite frankly, could not speak English, which is a safety issue.
Yeah.
Could we ever extend that to Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, cab drivers, for someone who takes a lot of Ubers, a lot of my drivers who can't speak
Oh,
English?
well, that's not good. I didn't like that. Go ahead, John.
So that's a really good point. The problem is that our states are the ones that issue these licenses. So with commercial driver's licenses, we do have some federal control. But again, we have thousands of people who can't speak the language, long-standing rule, and it's a safety issue, right? If you can't understand road signs, if you can't communicate with law enforcement when you're pulled over and communicate what's on your rig, huge problem. But the last administration, Mr. President, they let truck driving schools self-certify that they were qualified to train truck drivers. And so this is like the Leering Center. So you pay $800 and you get a certificate that you passed a CDL driving school, and again they have no skills. They don't have the knowledge, and they don't have the skills. They haven't gone through any of the testing, and then they get licenses, and they're killing Americans on our roads. So it's remarkable the rot that the last administration allowed to take place. We are ending that, and I need partnership with our states. Even California started to come on board. Even Gavin has started to play ball with us, which is surprising. Sure. Not all the way, a little bit of ball.
Mr. President,
You know, it's interesting because I just saw something that the nursing home business and the daycare centers in particular, they went out and inspected them in Minnesota, and they didn't exist. They're knocking on the door. He happens to be a young man, Nick, nice young man. He's done a very good job. They're knocking on doors. It's like homes, and they're getting hundreds of thousands of that. They didn't exist, and in California it's worse. It's even worse. And I spoke with Russell Vogt. I said, Russell, don't send them any money. He said, but we have a court order that we have to. Can you believe it? A judge. The judges are really hurting this country. Our judges, Justice Roberts doesn't like what I say it, but the judges are really hurting this country. And frankly, the justices, the Supreme Court, has really hurt our country too.
Mr. President, do you have a new deadline, given that there are some talks now? Do you have a new deadline before taking?
No, I'll announce it. I mean, right now, you're talking about a deadline for doing some pretty big damage, even bigger than we've done. We'll see. Look, we have very substantial talks going on with respect to Iran, with the right people. You know, I told you about a present, right? Steve, can I reveal the present?
You can do anything you want.
Thank you. They said to show you the fact that we're real and solid and we're there, we're going to let you have 8 boats of oil, 8 boats, 8 big boats of oil. This was 2 days ago. And they'll sail up tomorrow. That was 3 days ago. And I didn't think much about it. And then I watched the news, and they said, a very good anchor, actually, happened to be Fox. But I watched it, and he said, something's unusual happening. There are 8 boats that are going right up the middle of the Hormuz Strait. 8 big tankers are going loaded up with oil right through. And I said, well, I guess they were right, and they were real. And I think they were Pakistani flagged. Yes. And I said, well, I guess we're dealing with the right people. And actually, they then apologized for something they said, and they said, we're going to send 2 more boats. And it ended up being 10 boats. All right, I hope I haven't screwed up your negotiations, but I thought it was appropriate to say, because I did taunt you the other day by saying they're going to give us a present.
There were 2 illegal immigrants who were arrested at San Francisco airport for ignoring deportation orders. At the same time, as you highlighted, really great reception from American travelers for ICE agents. Is there a PR aspect of this that can allow future deportations to go on with less protesting, less outrage?
Yeah, it's amazing, because by putting ICE there, Look, the press was very unfair to ICE. So was everyone else. These are great American patriots. They have a tough job. They have to find murderers and take them out of our country. I wouldn't want to do it. You wouldn't want to do it. Most people wouldn't want to do it. They do it. And, 11,888 murderers. And that's murderers. That's not drug dealers. That's not lots of other things. It's not people from mental institutions. Entire jail populations were released from major countries and let into our country through the open border. And ICE has done an amazing job. I wouldn't want that job. It's a tough job, dangerous job. So what happens is, by putting them at the airport, and I just say, do me a favor, take off your masks, and they did. For that, not for when they're looking for some, cold-blooded killers and they're in the, but for that, and they did, they took them off. And the passengers, I see the interviews of people, they're saying, these are nice people. One person said, he's a very strong man, but he's a nice guy. He grabbed my bag. He helped a woman with a bag that she couldn't lift. And I'll tell you, I don't want to use the word rehab because there was nothing to rehab, but rehab from the press, because the press is so tough on them. And these crooks in Minnesota, these crooked politicians and dirty cops, they're dirty politicians. Waltz is a dirty, crooked politician. The Attorney General is a crooked guy. No investigations, and I hope JD's going to do a great job. He's in charge of it now with somebody who's very talented. But I think it's easy stuff. They say $19 billion, think of it, is missing. $19 billion. If we would solve half of the fraud problem, Pam, in this country, we would have more than a balanced budget. We'd have a surplus. And in the case of Minnesota, it's very Somalia-oriented. Think of it. These people come from a crooked country, disgusting country, one of the worst countries in the world, acknowledged to be one of the worst countries in the world. Some people say it's the worst. They have no money. They have nothing. They come to our country, low IQs, and they rob us blind. Stupid people. And they rob us blind because we have crooked politicians and we have dirty cops. The Attorney General is a dirty cop. It's my opinion. It's only my opinion. And something should be done about him. Let's see what kind of job he can do.
Yesterday you said that you hate mail-in ballots.
Excuse me?
Should Iran be able to charge a toll for the Strait of Hormuz? They're charging some vessels to go through.
Oh, yeah. Well, should they be able to? I mean, they shouldn't be able to, but they're doing it a little bit. I don't know. Look, their capability is a lot less than it was 2 weeks ago. And with every week and every day, frankly, it gets less and less. All I can tell you is they're begging to make a deal. So let's see what happens. We may make a deal. Tell me about mail-in ballots. Go ahead. You mean I used a mail-in ballot? You probably said, yeah, I did.
Why did you
You know
use
what?
that? Is
Because
it
I'm president of the United States, and because of the fact that I'm president of the United States, I did a mail-in ballot for elections that took place in Florida, because I felt I should be here instead of being in the beautiful sunshine
But you were in Palm Beach, sir, the last few weekends.
That's right, and I decided that I was going to vote by mail-in ballot because I couldn't be there, because I had a lot of different things. But we have exceptions for mail-in ballots. You do know that, right? So if you're away, we have an exception. If you're in the military, we have an exception. If you're on a business trip, we have an exception. If you're disabled, we have an exception. And if you're ill, if you're not feeling good, whatever. So I was away, mostly in Washington, D.C., so I used a mail-in ballot. But I appreciate the question because I know it was so well-meaning. Yeah.
Mr. President, I actually just looked up the company that owns Sharpie, and they stock turned positive after you mentioned it.
By the way, they deserve it.
Yeah,
it's a good product.
So you gave a 5-day deadline. With oil tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz, is that a condition to move that 5-day deadline?
Well, we don't want anything impeded. We want ships to go through. We don't know that they've dropped any mines, by the way, because we blew up all their mine droppers, right? We blew up every one of them. They're going to have to take them out on a rowboat or something. I don't know how the hell they get out there, but we don't really know. You might speak to it. We don't know. There could be a few of them out there, but that's a lot. If you have $1 billion ship and you get hit by a mine, it's not the greatest thing in the world. So if you think, the problem with that, that's not like you've decimated the military. If you think there may be a mine, that's a bad thought, and it stops things up. How are we doing in that regard, Peter?
Mr. President, you're right. We have so heavily degraded their coastal defense capabilities and their naval capabilities that any strategic or operational attempts to do those types of things are extremely limited. And we continue to move over the top of that. Now, whether Iran makes a wise choice or not to try to execute that is part of how this deal comes together. But with every passing day, the military pressure that we're putting on them lessens their ability to really hold that militarily at issue.
I mean, the problem with the issue of the Hormuz Straits is this. We've decimated them as a military. No Air Force, no Navy, very few rockets left. We blew up so many. Hard to manufacture them. Same thing with drones. The leadership is gone. The problem with the Straits is this. Let's say we do a great job. We say we got 99%. 1% is unacceptable because 1% is a missile going into the hull of a ship that cost $1 billion, right? So 1% is we can't. If we do a 99% decimation, that's no good.
So
it's really, a little bit. But I have a feeling it's going to clean up pretty quickly. I could just say this: they want to make, and I probably hurt our little negotiation. It gives them a little impetus to say, well, I wish you didn't say that. But they said yesterday that we weren't negotiating with them, and now they admit that we were negotiating with them. So they want to make a deal. The reason they want to make a deal is they have been just beat to shit.
So are you thinking of taking control of Iran's oil?
It's an option. I mean, I wouldn't talk about it, but it's an option.
Is that something you thought about?
Well, in Venezuela, we've done very well working with Venezuela, certainly. And we've taken in billions and billions of dollars. And by the way, Venezuela is doing better right now than they've ever done in the history of their country. And it's sort of like a joint venture. But the United States has made a lot of money, Marco, right? With it. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
About Venezuela?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Venezuela in the first 2 months of this year generated more revenue from oil sales than they had most of all of last year. But the money's not being stolen anymore. And it's being held in a U.S. Treasury blocked account. And to the extent it's flowing to the Venezuelan government, it's going to help people, like fund hospitals, pay teachers. It's not
and we
being
get
stolen.
a lot of it, and they got more than they have in many years. Think of it. We get a lot of it. We have a deal. We get a lot of it. We had 100 million, think of this, 100 million barrels we took in the first 2 weeks. 100 million barrels. That's a lot of oil. It's a lot of ships. And we got some, and they got some. We paid for the ships. A lot of money left over. And Venezuela has done better now with us. Call it a partner, call it whatever you want. We've made a lot of money, and they've made a lot of money. We've paid for the cost of that military hit many, many times over. And we've only just started.